Welcome to Modern Tactical Shooting. Now, this video is about the very first red dot optic adopted by a major military for use on their rifles. Now, I'm not talking about the Aimpoint or the EOTech, although the Aimpoint did see service in the early 90s with the U.S. Army with the Aimpoint 2000 and some other models with Ranger Regiment and some other Tier 1 and 2 forces, and of course was adopted en masse around late 1998 with the Comp M2 or the M68 as it's called in the military. I'm talking about the IDF issue Elbit Falcon Mark I optical gun sight from Israel, developed in the late 70s and saw itself on a Galil in the early 80s with the IDF. I'm going to cover my fascination, why I collect these, and what I like about them. So let's go. So before I talk about this optic, let me talk about where my fascination with Israeli Elbit Falcons began. And it actually goes back to Iraq 2005, my third tour. I noticed a lack of capability, a gap, you could say, in the equipment that we had. Of course, during that time, we had the M68, the Aimpoint, and we had EOTechs, and they both lacked one thing, and that is an auto brightness, meaning the dot you have to manually set for the brightness around you. And that works fine on the flat range, but what I found during missions is we would fly in blacked out under nods to the target, and more often than not, you enter these villages and there'd be street lights on. Heck, even some of the target buildings we hit used to have the lights on, or you'd be on one street that had street lights, you go one block over it and everything's blacked out. So I was always fidgeting with my optic at the time. I remember it being an EOTech, turning the brightness down or up depending on the light around me. And that just seemed like a huge pain. And I just asked myself, there's got to be a better option. There's got to be an optic out there that has auto adjust as far as brightness. And lo and behold, the Israelis have been rocking one since the early 80s. This Elbit Falcon Mark I was developed, as far as I can tell, around 1974 to 1978 and was first used in the early 80s. I think this picture is circa 1982 on this Galil here. And it has auto brightness and it works great. Depending on if you flow inside of a house and it's blacked out, the dot will turn down so you can still see it. And if you go out on a bright, super bright sunny day or aim at a light, this will catch up and will adjust itself appropriately so you can always see it. And that's what drew me to this optic. And I'm going to go ahead and cover the history of this and its practicality today and really why I collect these things. So it was right after my third tour in Iraq, 2005. I was searching on the early internet at the time. I came across this picture right here. Now, this is a late 90s photo. I can tell because this IDF soldier is rocking an M4A1, which didn't come out to around 1995. And on here, he has an Elbit Falcon Mark I optical gun sight. And once I learned the capabilities of that, I began my search. And I found one that year online, a complete Gen 2, which I'll get into the difference between a Mark I and a Mark II. They're referred to as Mark, not Gen. And I was able to purchase one, and I actually used it for quite some time on my issued guns. And I'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. But let me talk about the history first and the development of this optic. Now, all the information I have about the Elbit Falcon, I gleaned from the internet. I've actually contacted Elbit in Israel at least a dozen times over the last dozen years, and I've never gotten a response. So if there's any former IDF that are watching this video and you have more and better information in terms of when these got issued, dates, and things like that, by all means, post it down in the comments. I'd love to learn more about the history of this optic. But let me get into the history of the Gen 1 or the Mark I Elbit Falcon, and then I'll cover the Mark II. Let's do it. So the Mark I Elbit Falcon was purpose-built for the Galil. Now, of course, this is not a real Galil. This is an ATI Galileo. But when I got the Elbit Falcon first, I was dying to get a Galil platform to put it on since I was able to get this super rare Elbit Falcon mount. Now I'm going to take this off. It has a throw lever right here. This optic was developed purpose-built for the Galil. If you look at the bottom here, and I'll show a close-up in these photos, the bottom is curved to sit on top of the gas tube of a Galil and fit snug. So the body of this Elbit Falcon was built with the Galil in mind. Now, the way that mounts to a Galil is it has two brackets. If you look at this photo here, with the brackets mounted on the optic itself, and then in this other photo, you can see the brackets. The rear bracket goes around the barrel, and the front bracket goes around the gas tube. Again, if you check out this photo here. And then on the Elbit Falcon itself, it has a little socket right here, which clips into the rear bracket of the mount. And it has a slot on the front here that drops down and locks into place on the mount. So you attach the rear socket, you drop it down, and it has a little toggle that you flip down and it locks it in place. Now, there is a design flaw with the Mark I because it only has that one rear socket. There's a little bit of play in this, maybe because this mount is from the 80s, so maybe it's just worn out over time. But there is a little bit of play, but after I zeroed this thing up, I have no problem hitting A zones at 100 yards of this. So with it being designed for CQB in mind, this optic works great. Let me get back to the body of this thing a little bit more. Let me take it off here. So it has an on and off button on the left-hand side. It's a toggle forward and back. And this sits a full co-witness on a Galil. Let me drop it back down in here. Again, sits right on top, locks in place. You click it down, toggle it on. The dot appears as 5 or 6 MOA-ish. It is kind of large, but it is perfectly round. Now, there is one flaw I found with the Galil and the Elbit Falcon, besides the tremendous added weight, which I'll get into, and that is the front sight hood on a Galil perfectly bisects the lens of the Elbit Falcon so that the red dot appears really at the top of the front sight hood, which is kind of annoying. So the way I remedied that is I actually got a front sight hood from a Galil R, or not a Galil, from an R, South African R4. You can find them, and it's twice the diameter of the Galil hood, and now it's not in the way, and the red dot floats right above the front sight, kind of like your traditional optics would. So I solved that problem. But again, this, as far as I can tell, came out in the very early 80s, but actually was not adopted en masse by the IDF at all for the Galil. So developed for the Galil, yet never really issued for the Galil, and from what I can tell, it is due to the massive weight. This Elbit Falcon literally weighs almost a full pound. Add that to the already very heavy all-steel Galil, and really it's just too much weight. So the Mark I, which was purpose-built for the Galil, was really never issued and used on the Galil itself. So where this Mark I really was put in service with the IDF was not with the Galil. Maybe it saw some limited use due to the photo evidence I was able to find, but really it was put to use on the M16s and the Colt car commandos that the IDF started to adopt. The Galil actually had a very short lifespan in the Israeli military due to the weight and due to the fact that they were getting M16s a lot cheaper from the US government. So the Mark I, although built for the Galil, really was put into service, as far as I can tell, in the middle 80s, and it was used on M16s and ARs and those Colt commandos at the time. So the way they adopted it, they came up with a barrel and carrying handle clamp mount. So the Elbit Falcon basically sat on top of the handguard. And on the Colt shorties, the Elbit Falcon is basically the length of a carbine-length handguard. They came up with a front sight post clamp mount for the shorties. Super rare. I have not seen one in real life. So it was originally, mounted gooseneck style, as the term is called, or, the Elbit Falcon sitting on top of the handguard. Now, later, when the IDF started to get flat top uppers, they came up with a different mounting plate for the Mark I made by the Arms Company here in the US. So the Mark I was adapted to sit on flat top M4s and used up until the very late 90s, perhaps early 2000s. This is a Mark I on my AR-15. Now, this is not an arms mount. They're super rare. This is a mount made by Barnes Precision Machine here in North Carolina. I gave them this Mark I Elbit Falcon. They basically removed the rear plate, came up with a custom plate, and I just had them mount some primary arms microdock mounts as the actual base. But Barnes Precision Machine is actually able to reproduce this plate. So if you do have a working Mark I and you want to mount it flat top style on your AR, they can reproduce it. It's a custom order item, but you can give them a call and they can crank one out for you. This sits perfectly co-witness like the Mark I that was issued at the time. Now, the Mark I was the only Elbit Falcon used in service. In the early 90s, they came up with a Mark II, which is their commercial version. Now, if you watch closely in some of my range training videos where I demonstrate drills, I shoot these optics all the time. In fact, in the near far video, my son is actually using this carbine right here with the Gen 1 or the Mark I Elbit Falcon. And in other videos, like 15 Rounds of Fury with Tavor, I'm running a Elbit Falcon Mark II on the Tavor. Now, completely different generations. The IDF adopted the Tavor in the early 2000s. Of course, the Elbit Falcon came out in the 80s. This one is a 90s Mark II, so completely different eras, but I thought it looked cool and it does work, so I rigged up my Tavor with one. Now, the difference between a Mark I and a Mark II mainly has to do with the shape of the Elbit itself, the body of the Elbit, and the mounting platform. Now, of course, the Mark I was made to fit on a Galil, and then later on, they made the different mounts, basically adapted it for the barrel mount, and with an arms mount to go on a flat top upper. The Mark II, which is a commercial one, this was never used by the IDF. It was made for commercial sales, came out in the, I want to say, late 80s, early 90s, and sold, I believe, up until the middle 90s. This primarily was made to work with a Weaver style mount. This is Weaver mount on here. It will work on your modern pick rails. Also came out with a barrel clamp mount. If you check out this flyer here, you can see the barrel clamp and the handguard mount. They have one mounted to an AK with a Weaver style, a pistol. If it has a Weaver mount, it was adapted to work with that. Again, this Picatinny rail model or the Weaver model will work with Picatinny rails, or most rails that are out there. So I'm going to change up the camera angle real quick so I can give you close-ups of the Mark I and the Mark II, and to show you what accessories come in a complete Mark II kit. So let me change that up and I'll get to it. All right, so here we have a Mark I and a Mark II Elbit Falcon. Let's talk about the differences. Of course, on the Mark I, you can see this bevel built in the bottom of the scope body to sit on the gas tube of a Galil. Here's that locking bracket with a single, I would say a single detent for the rear mounting bracket. Now on the Mark II, they put a double detent to get rid of that left and right play if you do mount a gooseneck style. The body styles, the buttons are different. Here on the Mark I, it's a forward and back toggle. On the Mark II, it's a left and right. Now the Mark II is a little bit thicker, and if you look at the lenses, the Mark I has a larger lens. They both have a blue tint to them, but I prefer the Mark II because it does sit a full one-third co-witness height. Now, let me move these out of the way. A complete Mark II, if you're looking to find a complete one, will have a box, and the serial number will match that of the optic inside. Opening up the box, this would be the Mark II that goes with it. It will contain a manual. If the Weaver mount's installed, it will have the bottom plate if you decide to switch to gooseneck style. It is a 3-point 6, I believe. Lithium battery. It looks like a AA or AAA or not. It's not. It's a special lithium battery. It's actually a hub battery in a lot of military radios. You can actually find these online still. I was able to purchase some spares. Talking about battery life, in my longest running Elbit Falcon that I've owned, I've changed the battery 3 times since 2005. I don't leave my optics on all the time, but just going the range and shooting it, I've only had to change the battery 3 times. These batteries last forever. This battery is labeled 1992. It came with this Elbit Falcon, so that gives me an age of this actual optic right here. Around 1992, it was built, and it works perfect to this day. It's a great optic. Now, also in the kit, here is the actual old school mount. Let me get this out of here. This goes on the front part of a carrying handle, and this is an A1 barrel profile. Your kits will come with an A1 barrel profile for what I've seen. Basically, the detents lock into the back of here on your carrying handle when it's mounted there. And this part actually screws in here. And one bonus I got with this kit, this one actually came with an A2 barrel mount, very rare. Here's that screw, it locks it down. But I don't use the barrel mounts, but some kits do have an A1 and an A2 barrel clamp mount. But this is what would be in a full kit. Again, the box has a matching serial number to the optic, an A1 or A2 style barrel clamp, a manual, 1 or 2 batteries, and a extra bottom plate. If you're not running the Weaver mount, it will replace that. So the big question is, are these effective red dots? Yes, they are. Now, they're dated by today's technology standards. Your aim points are running a 2 MOA dot. Of course, EOTechs have a 1 MOA dot. So at 5 MOA, these are super large by modern standards. But this does work pretty well. I took this to Mid-South, part of team training way back in, I'll say, late 2005, early 2006 when I got my first Mark II. I had no problem hitting 6-inch plates out at 100. Now, can you do it better and faster with more modern optics? Certainly. But for what this was designed for CQB, this optic works great. In fact, in my early 3-gun career, I ran a Elbit Falcon at some matches if it was feasible for a red dot. And I used this for a number of years on my issued gun. Now, I never went to combat with one of these, mainly due to the circumstances. After my time in 5th Group, I did 3 tours, and I didn't get one until after my 3rd tour. I got transferred to be an instructor in Special Forces. Sometime in your career, you're going to have to go back to Fort Bragg and be an instructor. I ended up an instructor at our primary CQB schoolhouse. I actually ran one of these when I taught classes for a little bit. After my time as an instructor, I got assigned to 3rd Special Forces Group, which of course is in charge, or was in charge of Afghanistan up until very recently. In Afghanistan, the enemy uses terrain and distance to their advantage, and you need a low-powered variable optic or magnified optic. So a red dot just wasn't practical. But would I take one of these into combat? Yes, I would if the red dot met the environment I was fighting in. I use these. I don't just collect them. If you've seen some of my shooting drill videos, I'm running Elbit Falcons on some of my guns. Now, fun fact, if you go online, you Google search Elbit Falcons, I'm happy to say probably 80% of the photos that do show up are ones that I've taken over the years to cover this. I've also done a pretty in-depth article for DefenseReview.com about the Elbit Falcon Mark II because I didn't own any Mark Is at the time. Of course, now I own 2 Mark Is. So again, a lot of the photos that come up, I'm proud to say, are ones that I have posted. So if you're looking for a Mark I or Mark II, what are they worth? At the time when I bought a complete Mark II with all the accessories, I paid $450, which I think is a decent price. Now, seeing how they seem to be even harder and harder to find, I would probably pay up to $600 for a complete working Mark II. That's with the box, the guide, batteries, the mounts and everything. For a working Mark I without a mount, I think they're probably worth around $500. And if you can find that arms mount or a Galil mount, well, then definitely it's worth more because they are so rare and so hard to find. Again, I've been into Elbit Falcons since 2005. I've been able to purchase 4 Mark IIs and only 2 Mark Is since 2005 up, and it's now 2022 to show you just how hard these can be to find. All right, enough of me blabbing and droning on about the Elbit Falcons. Hopefully you found this video entertaining and informative. As always, enough watching me. Go out, hit the range, get your shoot on. By all means, try and find some Elbit Falcons on the internet and get one for yourself. They are a super cool optic, a neat piece of military history, being really the first red dot adopted en masse by a modern military. And I think they're pretty neat myself. So, as always, thanks for watching.